Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So it looks like folks are still logging on, and I definitely want to leave room for folks as you start to join us. So I'll start just by talking about some Zoom logistics. I know today is a very hot day, and I appreciate you all for joining and continuing to stretch your tolerance for Zoom. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Mal Skoron. I work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization based in Providence. In case you haven't noticed, this meeting will be recorded because we're on Zoom. That's a big advantage of these online meetings. I'm hoping that this is the first of many conversations that we have on this topic, and that there will be plenty of in-person opportunities to continue the conversation. But for those that can't make it tonight or want to be able to review this, we are going to be recording it. I'll ask that everyone remain muted if you're not speaking, just so that we can cut down on background noise, because we have a jam-packed agenda tonight. But there will be plenty of time to ask questions throughout the conversation, moderated by my colleague, Priscilla de la Cruz. Finally, you can use the chat to comment on things that you hear, ask questions for later, or react to things that are being said live. So with that, I want to introduce Bernice Miller-Travis of the Metropolitan Group, who is going to be guiding today's conversation.
Good evening, everyone. So nice to be with you. Thank you for spending some of your precious time this evening with us in this conversation about the Transportation Climate Initiative. I'm Bernice Miller-Travis, as Mal said. I'm Executive Vice President for Environmental and Social Justice at the Metropolitan Group, which is a social change agency that's been around for more than 30 years. I've only been with the group for a year and a half. But prior to that, I spent the last 35 years working to build the environmental justice movement in the US. And so I'm the co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice and still serve on its board and on lots of other boards and lots of other organizations. But I'm from the Harlem community in New York City, and I've lived in Maryland and the DC suburbs for the last 24 years and have been working to support growing the capacity of environmental justice groups, processes, dialogues with regulatory agencies to make sure that community needs are lifted up and centered in whatever those processes are. My colleague, Cheryl Little, is joining us. Cheryl and I are working hand in hand to work with the states that are part of the Transportation Climate Initiative in the District of Columbia to really lift up and center environmental justice and equity and climate justice and transportation justice in this process. And so that's our role we are independent consultants. We do not work for the Georgetown Climate Center or any of the state or jurisdictional agencies. We have been asked to come in and bring our expertise in working with communities around a whole host of justice and equity issues to make sure that they get baked into this process in meaningful ways that are really going to deliver benefits to communities going forward. So we've been in some conversation with Mal and with Priscilla about how do we make sure that this conversation is inclusive of everyone who has a stake in this in Rhode Island? And this is not the definitive conversation. This is just the first conversation. And we hope there'll be many more. But tonight, we're going to just try to take a walk through the Transportation Climate Initiative. You're going to hear from some stakeholders in Rhode Island about what their concerns are in terms of needs around transportation, infrastructure, systems planning, air quality, reducing emissions from the transportation sector as they impact EJ communities. And then we're going to have some dialogue about what you've heard and what your interests are. And so if we could start with Cheryl, if you could do a little introduction of yourself, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Cheryl Little. I'm based in Silver Spring, Maryland. And as Bernice said, I'm a support to the Transportation Climate Initiative working with Bernice. So I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves.
Yes.
Hey, I can go first since folks have already seen my face. So as I said, I work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance, which is a nonprofit based here in Providence. And our mission is to empower consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. We've historically focused on programs that make clean energy like wind and solar more accessible to people. But now transportation is the largest source of climate warming emissions in Rhode Island. Gas-powered cars are the norm, and not only is that a problem for the climate, it's a problem for folks that aren't served by the existing system or experience really high levels of air pollution because of it. And so in participating in this conversation and trying to bring folks together, we're looking to advocate for a decarbonized system that improves air quality and mobility for all. And we think the Transportation and Climate Initiative is a really important tool in the toolbox to achieve this end. We've been really fortunate to work with some great partners in this work, including the Latino Policy Institute and George Wiley Center. So I will let Marcela from the Latino Policy Institute introduce herself and talk a little bit about her work.
Thank you so much, Mel. My name is Marcela, as Mel mentioned. The Latino Policy Institute is based in Rhode Island. We're actually part of Roger Williams University. We've been around for a little bit over 15 years. And as our name says it, our main focus is the Latino community in our state. Latinos right now are a little bit over 16% of the population. And our main goal is to ensure that through public policy, we examine and communicate the evolving experiences of Latinos in our state. And we specifically focus on the evolving portion because Latinos are not a monolith. And as an organization, we try to evaluate, communicate, and kind of connect with stakeholders, community members, and policymakers around the intersectional barriers and issues that affect our community and other historically marginalized communities. So a big part of our work has to be climate justice, and we are incredibly proud and fortunate to be here today and to be working with other organizations in this. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Go back to you, Mel.
Yeah, Camilo, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Camille Viveris. I'm the executive director of the George Wiley Center, and I'm happy to be here with Leslie Hernandez, Enriquez, that's going to talk about some of our current organizing around this issue. But I wanted to start with just kind of giving a little glimpse into the past. George Wiley Center has been around for 40 years. We were founded in 1981. I've been here for about 10 years. And we were going through our archives and we found this photo, a newspaper article from October 11th, 1995, that was celebrating a victory that helped win access for low-income seniors. And I wanted to really thank the Green Energy Consumers Alliance for bringing us together because, time and time again, we see how it's our power is really based on our ability to work together and bring people together. So going back to the mid-90s, it was the Gray Panthers, the George Wiley Center, and actually a retired union bus driver from the ATU that helped win historic victories around free bus passes. And then more recently, the Senior Agenda Coalition, Rhode Island Organizing Project, and the Federation of the Blind helped defend that victory. And here we are today, right? Being brought together to once again come together as organizations, come together as individuals. And so we're hoping that this will help engage more allies, more folks that are directly affected. Folks mostly know the George Wiley Center associate us with either food security or utilities. And we know that utilities, broadly defined, just like infrastructure, we see it being more broadly defined. It can include public transportation. So we're committed to work with anyone and everyone to make sure that people's basic needs are one, right? And that people can live in dignity no matter what your income is. And we're committed to fight for racial justice and economic justice. So it's a real honor to be here. And hopefully this will be the start of some more dialogues online and in person. But Leslie, please, Leslie helps provide a lot of bilingual organizing for the George Wiley Center.
So hi, my name is Leslie Enriquez. As Camilo said, I am part of the George Wiley Center, and I wanted to explain a little bit about base building and how we build momentum with all these efforts that we're working on. So as I said, an important part of organizing and creating a relationship with the community is base building. So a few of the strategies we use are weekly meetings. We have meetings on Wednesdays where we talk with the community and what they want to see and how we can help continue our efforts and continue gaining momentum. We also do phone banking. We also encourage our members to share our efforts with their friends and family, letting somebody know what we're doing, and then they can explain it to their friend, and their friend is the cycle where we just come up with a lot of members. In the midst of the pandemic, we kind of have to find other ways of also finding ways to get in contact with people. So one of the methods that we've been using is we've been printing out postcards like the one on the next slide, and we've been putting it in grocery bags that are handed out to community members. That way they're able to, read the postcard while they're unpacking their groceries, and that way, we can spread the word a little more. So in collaboration with the Rhode Island Latino Policy Institute and the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we created a postcard to see what the community would like to see. This is a great way to get in contact with people and find out exactly what they want to see change in their community, since there are so many different members with different needs, it's incredibly important to make sure we don't forget about, a specific, group of people or ideas that people want to see. As you can see, a few of the questions on the postcard are basically asking, how do they get around the community, what the biggest challenge they see with finding a bus, how would you like the bus system to improve, and so on. The survey is also available in Spanish. Just to kind of repeat that public transportation is a basic need. It's vital that we have this is not even a privilege, it's like a need. And I kind of explain it in the bullet points that many low-income community members often have different obligations, whether it's working, taking care of relatives, and getting to school. They need a form of transportation to get there. And sometimes, riding a car or something different is just not available to them, whether it's like financially or they just, they don't have a car to get there. It's also important with helping seniors and the disabled who struggle with mobility get to where they want. Not to mention that public transportation connects people to jobs, increasing their access to employment opportunities, to education, training, social services, and healthcare. And at the end of the day, we all need a little social interaction, either saying hi to somebody next on the bus or getting to our family members or friends. It's important to keep in contact with each other, especially during these times. So just to kind of repeat myself, public transportation is a basic need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If the rest of our panelists briefly want to say a quick hello before we move on to the rest of our program, why don't we start with Pat Crowley?
Sure, thanks, Mom. My name is Pat Crowley. I am the Secretary Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. We represent 80,000 working women and men across the state of Rhode Island. And we have about 300 affiliated local unions. The AFL-CIO is the umbrella organization for the labor movement in Rhode Island. And I'm happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Let's move on to Enrique. And I'm not sure if I know the name of who else is there with you, but feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mel. thank you everyone for having us here as an organization. My name is Enrique Sanchez, and this is Rosario has been with ONA for about 10 years now. ONA Providence was created in 1998 under Eduardo Sandoval and Father Raymond, and ONA Providence was created to build relationships with our immigrant community here in the Oniville, Manson community here in Providence. And Rosario, ¿quiere decir un poco de palabras? Presentándose usted en español.
Buenas tardes, yo soy Rosario Pren, estoy en Oniville como miembro de esta organización desde hace 9 años aproximadamente. Organización que fue creada en 1998 y que ha subsistido precisamente como apoyo y ayuda del vecindario de Olneyville. Es la Asociación de Vecinos de Olneyville.
Thank you. Let's pass the mic on to Rochelle Lee.
Rochelle, I think you might be on mute.
It keeps defaulting. There you go. Sorry, guys. My name is Rochelle Lee. I advise in technology problems that may or may not occur. But I work with the coalitions of the efforts to in this manner. It's a lot of work in the community around environmental justice issues, civil rights, equity, equal rights, education, and thanks for this important dialogue, and hopefully many to come.
Awesome. I think that is everyone. If you want to continue on, Bernice.
Thank you so very much. Am I running through the slides now? No, 15 minutes of Q&A. Where are we? So the reason that we are coming together to talk tonight is that I think you all are aware that multiple states, including the state of Rhode Island, are moving forward with an initiative called the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And the Transportation and Climate Initiative is looking to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from transportation sources, improve air quality and public health, increase resilience to the impacts of climate change, and provide more affordable access to clean transportation choices, promote local economic opportunity and create high quality jobs, maximize the efficiency of this multi-jurisdictional program to ensure greater benefits, and advance equity for communities overburdened by pollution and underserved by the transportation system. At the moment, 3 states and the District of Columbia, so Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and the District of Columbia have all signed a memorandum of understanding with each other to move forward in this effort collaboratively. But all the other states, except for New Hampshire, from Maine to North Carolina, are working in partnership to work on all those goals that I just laid out, to do all of that in each state. Each state will have its own mechanisms, its own legislation, its own complementary policies to enable TCI to function in each state in compliance with whatever state regulations are. But the important thing that we are working on is to make sure that communities that have been most impacted by the transportation sector, that have the highest levels of carbon pollution, that are impacted the most, are going to be sitting at this table and working with the states to help devise what the strategies are going to be, how the resources are going to be implemented, and that there's a real process, real relationship building, and not just, coming in at the end when big decisions have already been made that are going to affect people's lives, but to be at the beginning of the process, which is right now, to help inform what these policies are going to look like. So we're going to walk through this process now. So as I said, TCI is a regional process, a regional approach, the Transportation Climate Initiative. It's prioritizing equity by dedicating a minimum of 35% of each jurisdiction's proceeds to ensure that communities overburdened by pollution and underserved by the transportation system benefit equitably from what those investments are going to be. Now, it says a minimum of 35%. That doesn't mean they can't spend more and direct more of those resources to EJ and underserved communities, but no less than 35% of what gets raised in this auction, in this market. To ensure meaningful input, including through an equity advisory body primarily composed of people from or who work in partnership with underserved and overburdened communities, with an emphasis on people who actually live and work in these communities, that they'll be able to assess the equity impacts of the program on an ongoing basis, including by monitoring air quality in communities overburdened by air pollution. So people can say that they're going to do a whole lot of things, but where the rubber meets the road is the pollution actually being diminished? Are the emissions coming down? Is the air quality improving? And the only way you can really figure that out is if you're monitoring the air quality and then you're sharing that information with communities and the public at large. And then lastly, to create additional policies to achieve emissions reductions, particularly in overburdened and underserved communities. Next slide. So how will TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative program, work? That's what TCIP is the acronym for. By placing a binding cap on carbon dioxide pollution from on-road diesel and gasoline sold in participating jurisdictions, meaning all those states that you saw on the map and the District of Columbia, and then reducing the pollution allowed each year. So each year, the cap will go down further and further and further until they reach a 26% reduction in the level of carbon emissions. Next slide. How will the Transportation Climate Initiative program work? By requiring suppliers of gasoline and diesel to hold allowances for the pollution from the fuel they sell, right? So those are the fuel holding tanks. Those holding tanks take that fuel, or transport vehicles come and get that fuel from those holding tanks, and then they take it to gas stations. And it's the emissions that happen there, and also when people fill up, that they're trying to cap. And then once those vehicles are on the road, the emissions that they release there is what they're trying to reduce. Next slide. How will the Transportation Climate Initiative program work? It's going to target and invest allowance auction proceeds. So those allowances and those proceeds are going to cost money, and they're going to raise money in a marketplace. And it's going to take and invest some of those proceeds to provide more affordable access to clean transportation choices, advancing equity for overburdened and underserved communities, and reducing pollution even more. So electric buses, school buses, public transportation, different low impact vehicles, right? Electric vehicles, but also things like expanding broadband in rural communities and tribal communities will be some of the things that you can use those investments for. Expanding the air quality monitoring network, right? Purchasing more air monitors and creating a network where people could actually see in real time what are the pollution, what's the levels that they're being exposed to, and how, after they make these various investments and input various programs, how do we start to see those emissions come down? Next slide. So here are some of the range of things that the investment strategies and benefits could go into. Each jurisdiction will decide how to invest its share of proceeds to benefit individuals and businesses, reduce pollution, and improve transportation choices. I don't know if you all can see those little things, but I'm going to blow them up on my own screen and just read out to you quickly. So 1, improve air quality by reducing harmful greenhouse gas emissions, also reducing health concerns such as asthma caused by poor air quality, decreased healthcare costs and lost productivity because of asthma and other respiratory diseases, improve public transit. These are all options of things that can be done. Help businesses purchase and support electric vehicle fleets and charging stations for those vehicles. Encourage the use of cleaner and quieter vehicles in neighborhoods. Reduce congestion for commuting employees and increase productivity. Enable drivers to switch to more efficient vehicles and fill up less at the gas pump. There's also a lot of thought being given to how to make those electric vehicles more affordable. Everybody can't afford a Tesla, right? So this is not a conversation about let's make sure everybody gets a Tesla. Expand safe bike lanes, bike paths, walking trails, and sidewalks. Create incentives for continued telecommuting to reduce long commute times. Improving high-speed wireless internet in rural and low-income areas, and creating jobs through infrastructure investments to boost the economy. So those are just some of the things that folks have been talking about as ways that you can invest those resources to do a number of things, right? To reduce carbon emissions, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to improve air quality, thereby improving public health, to take gas and diesel powered vehicles and switch those into electric powered vehicles, which have less of an air pollution impact, to expand broadband, to reduce congestion. All of those things are possible. And don't forget that folks can, if you have any questions, that you can drop those questions into the chat. And we're also going to have some Q&A after I go through all of this. And I only have a few more slides. Next slide. The health and safety benefits from the Transportation Climate Initiative program, they estimate that if all of the states are participating, that there could be as much as 290 million each year in health and safety benefits, just the health and safety benefits, by reducing premature deaths from asthma and other respiratory diseases, by reducing the number of people that have the incidence of asthma or have severe asthma attacks, to reduce traffic-related injuries. And there could be up to 3.3 billion in health and safety benefits with the full participation of all the states that you saw on that initial map. And results from the Transportation Equity, Climate, and Health Project, that's TREC, the acronym TRECH, an independent multi-university research initiative led by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, has been measuring what are the actual quantifiable public health benefits that could come from the full implementation of TCIP. And they're going to continue to work with communities to figure out what is the kind of research and data that communities need to make sure that the benefits that they say are going to come from this program are actually going to be realized by folks. Next slide. So what are the opportunities for public input? And let me ask this question. Can people see these slides? Because they're looking kind of small to me. Can people see them?
Yes, I can see them well.
Okay, so the first thing was the signing of a memorandum of understanding in December of 2020 that happened with Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and the District of Columbia, and other states, North Carolina, Maryland, and others, New York, are expected to join this process soon. In 2021, what they're working on now is a model rule that all of the states can then use to base their own implementation strategies on, but it'll be a uniform thing for every state, and then every state can then modify that for their own particular reality. In 2021 through 2022, legislative and rulemaking processes in each participating state so that they have the support of the legislative process to implement the Transportation Climate Initiative. And hopefully Terry Gray from your environmental agency is going to give us a little update on that in our conversation this evening. In 2022, they're going to roll out the reporting requirements. What are the states required to do under the Transportation Climate Initiative program? And then in 2023, TCIP, the Transportation Climate Initiative program, is going to become operational for the first time. And then over the next 2 to 3 years after that, there's going to be monitoring, reporting, and program reviews of how the program is working and whether or not the desired benefits are actually being achieved. As all of that process is going on, they're going to establish equity advisory bodies. Rhode Island is going to have its own equity advisory body at which community members can serve on to help advise this program and how it gets implemented in the state of Rhode Island. They'll be planning for investments in complementary policies that will happen in conjunction with the equity advisory bodies. And then they'll be implementing investments and complementary policies once the program goes live in 2023. Next slide. And the Memorandum of Understanding makes several commitments to public engagement, including ensuring that overburdened and underserved communities can provide meaningful input into decision-making processes, not merely advisory, but meaningful, where you see that the input that you have made is actually having impact on how the program is being implemented, what those complementary policies might look like, how they're prioritizing various investment strategies. So meaningful means a real role in the process. Establishing the equity advisory bodies made up of diverse stakeholder groups with a majority represented by overburdened and underserved community members themselves to advise on the Transportation Climate Initiative program's decision-making, including defining underserved and overburdened communities. How is that defined in Rhode Island? Recommending equitable investment in complementary policies. Developing metrics for evaluating program benefits. Again, how do we know that it's working? We have to have some way to measure so that people can see and have confidence that this program is actually working and that it's bringing benefits to them in a variety of different ways, not the least of which is improving air quality. And that's the last slide. Questions, thoughts, suggestions, pushback, anything, everything is on the table now. Your turn.
I love that everything's on the table, Bernice. We do have some great questions on the chat that Cheryl has been addressing, but I think they might be good to say out loud and share with the group.
Okay.
So there was a clarifying question that you got to in terms of the jurisdictions, clarifying what jurisdictions are and why the term is being used versus states.
Oh, I forgot Connecticut, because DC is not a state yet. And those of us who live down here are hoping that that will happen soon. But because DC is not a state, that's why we use jurisdictions.
And then a great follow-up question from Kate is, so as a state will decide as a whole how the money will be used. Is that correct? And Kate might have another follow-up thought after that question.
I want to ask if Terry Gray is on the call. Do you see Terry?
Hi, Bernice. I'm
Hi,
here.
Terry. Can you answer that question? Hi, Terry.
Good evening. Absolutely. So first I'll introduce myself. My name is Terry Gray. I'm the Deputy Director for Environmental Protection at DEM. And I've been working on TCI for the past couple of years as the Rhode Island team lead. To answer the question, each jurisdiction, or in our case, our state, has the ability to decide exactly how the funds are invested. The intention is to make sure that they're invested in clean transportation and green transportation projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also reduce the demand for gasoline and other fossil fuels. So we do have that ability. Our intention is to rely heavily on the advice of the Equity Advisory Board when it's established to come up with an annual investment plan. And right now, our estimates are that we should see about $20 million a year in revenue in Rhode Island from the auction of the allowances that Bernice talked about in her presentation.
Other questions, Priscilla? Thank you, Terry. Much appreciated. I think I keep living out Connecticut, by the way. So it's the District of Columbia, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts that are so far participating.
We do have another question from John. Can you speak about the survey being conducted in Rhode Island? And when do you expect it to be completed? How can we review the results? And just clarifying here, I'm guessing we're getting to the survey that George Wiley Center reference. John, and feel free to take yourself off mute if that's helpful. if you feel comfortable doing
Yes, thank
that.
you. Thank you, Priscilla. That's exactly what I was talking about. Just interested in the survey, the results, when it's going to be conducted, how many people you think it may reach, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically the survey, like all mediums in the organizing arena, it's a method for us to reach out to folks. So what we're planning on doing is continually conducting outreach, and we encourage everyone on this call to get copies of the online and physical postcard surveys if that's helpful. And then what we want to do is bring people together either virtually or in person to look at the results. But we're still amidst that project, and basically it's a movement-based approach. So the more of us that get involved, the more successful we'll be at really getting the word out and increasing participation. So so what I would say is yeah, get in touch with us or the Green Energy Consumers Alliance to get copies or links, and any organization here that if you can share it, blast it, text it, tweet it, right? Like virtually, digitally, and also in person. And then really we want to have this conversation together, right? Like if about how successful we are at reaching critical groups of people that really are most directly affected. So hopefully that's a process that we can decide together as a group of organizers.
Thank you, Camilo. And I'm going to jump around a bit here, but just know we're going to get to all of the comments and questions that are coming in that are great. Just for a second to keep us focused on the topic of TCI. Greg asked a really good question for Bernice or Terry. How will CT's refusal to include it in this legislative session affect things everywhere and in Rhode Island?
Is CT Connecticut?
Yes, Connecticut. Sorry, I should have said Connecticut.
Terry, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been in close contact with Connecticut about what's transpiring in their legislature right now. And for those of you that follow that, you might know that Governor Lamont signed on to the MOU, like Bernice explained earlier, and then he submitted TCI quote unquote legislation as part of their budget. And yeah, as all of you know, legislation sometimes gets messy, right? And there's a lot of back and forth between the different branches of government. And in the latest back and forth, the Senate in Connecticut removed TCI from the state budget. Now that doesn't mean TCI is dead. It doesn't mean that Connecticut is dropping out of TCI. What that means is that TCI isn't in their budget. And Connecticut the executive branch is still working hard with the legislature, and they may get separate TCI legislation introduced and debated in the remaining part of their session. But if not, Connecticut's still in. Governor Lamont is not pulling out of the MOU. He is still fully committed to the TCIP, and they will just have to get back at it when their legislature reconvenes and come at it a different way to get their legislative authority. We're in Rhode Island, we're going through the same legislative process right now. We have bills introduced in the House and the Senate. The Senate bill has had a hearing. It was a very productive hearing. We had 22 witnesses signed up in favor of TCI and 2 witnesses that had concerns with it. There is a bill in the House. It's assigned to House Finance, and they have not had a hearing yet. But in the Providence Journal today, the Speaker of the House said that he anticipated that there would be a hearing on the TCI bill before the session closed. So, the legislative process is, like I said, it can be bumpy, it can be messy at times, and it follows its own track. The key thing is the finish line, and we're all driving towards that finish line still.
Thank you, Terry. And a follow-up question for you, Terry, just clarifying on the revenue that's going to be collected. Kate was asking if the 20 million are the total funds available. So could you clarify what the 20 million revenue is? And then also could you speak to how that relates to the 35% minimum carve out for environmental justice communities?
Sure. Oh, you're asking me math questions and it's like 7 o'clock at night. Oh my God. All right. So when just to back up a little bit, Rhode Island is anticipated to have about 3.3 million allowances in a regional auction. And that doesn't matter how many states are involved, right? It could be, we could have Pennsylvania, New York, and Virginia expand the pool significantly, but Rhode Island's going to have 3.3 million allowances to start off with. And when we auction those, we're anticipating that we'll get that $20 million in revenue that you said, Priscilla. And then what we're committing to is at least 35% of that that revenue. So $7 million a year will be invested directly to benefit underserved and overburdened communities. And what that means and how that money is spent is going to be subject to a discussion that we have with the Equity Advisory Board. And just to top that off, we anticipate that we're going to spend way over that 35% that's going to benefit these facilities. That's the floor. We really think it's going to be higher than that, and that the benefits are really going to be focused on communities that live near our congested roadways and that really have kind of borne the brunt of vehicle emissions for the past 50 years basically. So we're anxious about this. Part of the money, just to be fair, part of the money will go to administering the program too. So we will, we're going to have to hire staff to do the grants and to manage the money and to manage the program. So some of that will go into that, but it won't be significant.
Thank you, Terry. And then here's a question generally about emissions in electric cars from Betty. Betty asks, electric cars create more demand for the production of electricity. Does an electricity production create more greenhouse gases? If someone wants to take that one.
I could take that one too if you want. So
Harry, I'm so glad you're on this call.
No problem. So when we talk about eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, a simple way to think about that is we're electrifying everything, and then we're powering the electrification of our economy with renewable energy. So when we talk about offshore wind, when we talk about advanced adoption of solar, even onshore wind, that's the clean power that's going to be used to power our economy in the future. Now, the big piece that's still evolving is storage. So we have to really look at storage and optimizing the grid, but it's not, you're not trying to transfer emissions from the cars and trucks over to the power plants. We're trying to eliminate the emissions by investing in clean renewable energy, and at the same time transitioning our transportation sector to be powered off that clean renewable energy.
Great, thank you, Terry. Any other questions for Bernice or Terry? Also, feel free to unmute yourself. We're a relatively mid-sized small group. Go ahead, Timmons.
Hi, Priscilla, thanks. And everybody, this is great. And Bernice, you really gave me sort of a pep talk on what TCI could do. And I want to say that really all these provisions on environmental justice and on community participation are a real achievement. And they're a testimonial to the work that's been done across the whole TCI region. It's remarkable. What I wish was, the first point is I wish that this program was more ambitious, that it had more money coming in as well, and that it was driving more emissions reductions, or that these same kind of structures can be applied to broader programs, this kind of spending ratios and decision making in the communities should apply to other spending that's going into the sector of transportation and to other, anyway, you get the point.
Yeah.
The other point I want to make is that it's not been mentioned yet, but there's a very strong opposition to TCI.
Yep.
It's been extremely effective. It's chiseling away at the number of jurisdictions of states, and they're, you know, raising a lot of just red herrings. They're bogus issues that have no grounding in the truth. And unfortunately, I think, you know, that it's been, you know, often libertarian think tanks that are funded by the fossil fuel industry, who are, and the, you know, like gas stations and so on, and fuel distributors that are lobbying behind the scenes while we have good hearings at the legislatures. There's often lobbying that's behind the scenes that some of it's reported and some of it's not. And I think this coalition needs to, I mean, if we're going to get the good things that you all have worked so hard on for these justice provisions and community participation, to figure out how to respond to these really outrageous claims that have mobilized a lot of business community and people concerned about gas prices, which are going to go up by, you know, some of the numbers that we're hearing are 5 to 9 cents or something like that a gallon, which of course the price of gas fluctuates at that level all the time. So anyway, I don't know if this is a question, but I just want to.
It's a great set of observations that you've offered. So first of all, thank you for noting the work that's gone on to really lift up and center equity and justice provisions. And I would encourage everyone to, if you can, and Mal, I hope we can do it, or Terry, that we can share the link to the webinar that TCI, that the states are holding tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. Is it tomorrow, Terry, or Thursday?
I'm sorry, it's Thursday.
It's Thursday.
Right.
And so people have asked questions about how are you going to stabilize the market? How is this really going to work? And I would really encourage people to get on the webinar, because they're really going to walk through it at much deeper detail than I did. But another thing that's going to be shared at the webinar is a series of equity and justice provisions, commitments that are going to be shared for the first time at the webinar. And even more, Timmons, than you see now is going to be released on Thursday. And they're going to want your feedback and public comment, and you will have until August to give your feedback. And there's the registration link that Cheryl just dropped into and Mal just dropped into the chat for how to register for that webinar. It is true that there's a lot of opposition, but Timmons, I want to lift up a different group of opposition. And so in the spirit of full transparency, I want folks to know that there's a lot of opposition from environmental justice stakeholders to TCI. Not all environmental justice stakeholders, by no means, but some. And that opposition has been fairly strong as well. And I want to characterize the opposition in this way, to say that there are many people who are opposed to market-based mechanisms from a moral standpoint, right? And what Vernice personally thinks, not what Metropolitan Group thinks, the Georgetown Climate Center, what Terry or anybody else thinks, this is what Vernice thinks. I think that in the transportation sector, there are long-standing inequities and injustices grounded in deep-seated racism, systemic racism, and institutional racism. And we just have to be straight about that. Can you fix those long-standing institutional challenges through a market-based mechanism? Vernice does not believe that you can. But that's not what TCI is trying to do. That's a bigger conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And in this moment of racial reckoning, we need to have it in the context of the transportation system, right? So I'll just give you one example. You may have seen a lot of information last week rolled out about the 100th anniversary of the race massacre in Tulsa. But what didn't get lifted up as much as that community was devastated, the community built itself back entirely. All 30 blocks of that community was restored painstakingly by the community members themselves and their descendants. What happened to that community? They built a highway that went right through the community and destroyed the community. Just as much as the race massacre did, that highway development completely took the Greenwood neighborhood out. There's now only one city block left of what used to be a 30-block long community. That legacy is alive and well in communities all across the United States, and certainly up and down the Northeast corridor. I-95 was a great thing in terms of moving goods and people and services, but it was a really awful thing for a lot of communities and a lot of other state highways as well. That conversation still needs to be had, and that reckoning still needs to be had, but that is not the goal of the Transportation Climate Initiative. The goal of the Transportation Climate Initiative is to figure out, with the tools and mechanisms that we have right now, what can you do to reduce carbon emissions, to make the transportation system more just, more equitable, more fair, and less harmful. And that's what TCI is about. I don't want to divert people from having that bigger conversation. But what I do want to say is that this is not necessarily the forum for that bigger conversation, but it is a legitimate critique, I think, to say that market-based mechanisms are not the way to fix long-standing systemic injustice and racial inequity. So that's where some of the EJ stakeholders are coming from. As Timmons described some of the more orchestrated opposition, it is coming from folks in all of the quarters that he said. It is not random. It is not a few small shop owners. It is really a big, massive campaign. But just like with voting rights, people know what's in their best interest. And so it's up to you all to decide. If you think this is in your best interest in Rhode Island, then you're going to have to stand up and lend your voice to make sure that it happens, that it gets enacted, and that the resources do flow in the way that that Terry and others who are working to build it are trying to make sure that it does. But make no mistake about it, this is a battle. This is not, we're having a nice, friendly conversation over the dinner hour. Some people are not so friendly about how they feel about TCI, right? So I just want to make sure that you all know, and Timmons is absolutely right, there is a lot of orchestrated opposition to TCI. It is not just going to sail through, and people are working hard, and your state leaders are working particularly hard, and Terry has been a real leader around the equity and justice dimensions of this work, because that's the way you all roll in Rhode Island. So
thank you, Bernice.
And Bernice, I wanted to point out, we do have a raised hand from Alexandria, wondering if you wanted, if we should go to Alexandra's question really quickly,
yes,
or
we should.
Go for it, Alexandra, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alexandria, and I'm representing Gather Together United as one, as well as a volunteer at George Wiley. So I just wanted to make a comment about what you had just said. I was just filling out the survey, and one thing that is very prominent here with the bus system, especially the bus system, is that it is racially unjust, right? Mm-hmm. So we're segregating neighborhoods. Now we're also segregating the bus system. People are forced to basically, go to their elbow to get to their knee. Mm-hmm. And I think by them trying to, we need to focus more on what are the customers' needs? What are the needs of the community members, more so than what are the needs of the providers or the big businesses or politicians that are receiving, whatever it might be for these new projects or whatever. I will say too that, our bus depot bathrooms have been closed and are still closed. There was a press release that went out in the newspaper, and to me, the only reason that those bathrooms are actually closed is because they're trying to keep the homeless folks out. But what you're doing is you're now allowing mothers that with children and people that are commuting to work. And I just think we need to focus more on what are the actual needs of the community members, opposed to, the providers, because it is very racially unjust.
I'm so glad you raised that, Alexandria. It is almost a hallmark of transportation planning, right? When people talk about communities being on other sides of the railroad tracks, that was literally a way that segregation was implemented in many cities and in many jurisdictions is they used the transportation system, the railroad tracks, to separate people, and usually separate people based on race. There's so much history within our transportation systems that are mired in inequity. And so I think the one thing that can be done, Alexandria, to address the many issues that you raised is to come to transportation planning with new eyes, new commitment, new thinking, information, that we don't repeat the problems and the mistakes that we've made in the past. We don't take new money and put it into bad old systems, right? But we create new systems that meet people's needs, that don't separate and segregate people, that give good service to customers across the system, no matter where those customers live or where they get on and off the transportation, the trains or the buses or any other vehicles. I think that this is an opportunity to go back and correct some of those problems, but for God's sake, to not carry them forward into the next decade, the third decade of the 21st century. And if we don't take that opportunity now, we can hold our agencies to account, but we also have to hold ourselves to account. Does that make sense, Alexandria?
Absolutely. One thing, I rode the bus here in Rhode Island as well as in Colorado. And back in 2014, Colorado has a system where, it's like we're getting to it now. It's like this universal bus pass, right? But just eliminating, the pain relievers, let's call them, for these clients. And I feel like in any marketing strategy, any business plan, your customer segments are the most important thing, right? So I think just getting back to the basics of customer segments, what are their pain relievers and how can we address them? Because if we can address those, we'll actually save money.
So here's something for folks to think about and take forward into your thinking and your dialogues about this. There's a provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 called Title VI of the Act, right? And Title VI says that you cannot be a recipient of federal resources and use those resources or spend those resources in a way that discriminates against certain protected groups of people. And the protected groups of people are defined in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So people have to make sure that if you receive federal monies, right? So the Rhode Island Department of Transportation receives federal money. Every agency in Rhode Island receives some federal money, and it can be as little as $1 of federal money. But you have to make sure that the way you invest those resources, and now we're talking about federal resources, that it's equitably distributed. So if there's an intrastate bus system, the system has to serve all segments of the population equitably. It can't have lots of bus lines in one part of town and very few in another. That's inequitable, right? Same for the rail system, et cetera, et cetera. Some EJ groups have brought really excellent cases, filed Title VI complaints against transportation agencies for not making sure that the system equitably serves all the people in a given jurisdiction. So there's civil rights dimensions to this. There's access, there's ability, there's translation, right? So that people who don't speak English also have access to the resources. There are all kinds of issues related to this, and they weren't always paid attention to in the past. And so going forward, I think we need to flip that script and say, how do we meet the needs of the people who are left behind? How do we center them and put them in the front of the bus, right? And not standing back at the stop while the packed bus goes by. Does that make sense?
Hey, this is Mal here. I just spotlighted some of our panelists, and I in particular would love to hear from Rochelle from the Kennedy Plaza Resilience Coalition and some folks that she's been working with to organize around this exact issue. So Rochelle, if you have anything to add, or John Flaherty, hate to put you on the spot, but feel free to add based on that.
Yeah. Actually, no, I was going to John say a few words since he asked later, but I think that Bernice is right. We need to anything and everything needs to be, you know, works in the, in the window, whatever it takes to get ball rolling and to get to that's what I'm doing. I think
Rochelle, I want to make a recommendation.
quite a bit.
Why don't you turn your camera off, but keep talking?
Well down to paying attention, people in power, understanding that they would like we say priorities. Kennedy Plaza is a perfect example. It's probably been under attack for just God knows when. We've been as a central bus hub. And part of that too around inequity, which we talked about in our complaint to FFC.
Rochelle, I'm so sorry.
You're
breaking
the fact
up
that when you dismantle Kennedy Plaza, if you look at the routes that actually go through Kennedy communities. So when you talk about inconvenience rights, we already have a profile pretty much of who those writers would be. Okay. My thing is a bit on. Let me just.
I can step in for on maybe on Rochelle's behalf because I've been working very closely. Yes.
Go ahead, John.
So yeah, I've been working closely with Rochelle through the RI Transit Riders group, and I did post in the chat a link to a pretty lengthy Title VI complaint that we filed on MLK Day, actually, in January. And it was around this issue of the State Department of Transportation releasing a plan to dismantle the state central bus hub in Kennedy Plaza, having a very negative impact on transit riders, making trips longer, less convenient, just adding a lot more hassle. And they just, you know, they were planning. It was a top-down plan that was introduced, and there's been an enormous amount of pushback. But I think that the complaint, filing the complaint, was really useful because even though the Department of Administration won't admit it, they did hit the pause button. They won't admit it was because of the Title VI complaint, but I think that they've made some changes to the plan that they're supposed to be releasing in the next several days. So I just raise it because I think it illustrates that going through that process, it was a lengthy process to do it, but I think that it had the result that we wanted, and it brought them back to the drawing board.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Any more questions for the panelists that spoke earlier about the work that's going on by organizations in Rhode Island? We have two questions. What are the needs and how could TCI be designed to help? So the what are the needs issues are issues that you all have to define in partnership with Terry and his colleagues. And that's part of what's going to happen as you sit around those equity advisory board tables together. And this is a question for each of the panelists as well. What are the needs that you all see that's come up in your own work? What's out there? What's going on? What needs to be addressed?
Can I jump in here? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Great. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for all these questions, all these concerns, and all the conversations that we're having around TCI, the Transportation Climate Program, and how it benefits low income, BIPOC, marginalized communities across the city and across the states. A lot of the work that I've been doing has been with a lot of progressive and leftist organizations across the states in identifying, the key descriptive issues, details of for in this case, the TCI program, I came to my conclusion, and I wrote down a list of things that we needed to work on, right, or that would help improve the TCI program. And this included a net positive environmental, health, and economics benefits for the most impacted communities, and need regular impact analysis. A focus first on emissions reductions in frontline and fence-line communities, community engagement, which would mean paying representatives of communities on committees, and also looking out for the rights of the workers, including fair labor standards and diversifying workforces. I also concluded here, or my analysis is that a polluter, right, for example, must be held accountable. Allowances should not be, ESOL at cost, capturing true cost of carbon, strictly regulate offsets so that co-benefits of air pollution emissions reductions happen locally. So we have to hold our politicians accountable, our mayor accountable, our state reps who don't, support the TCI program, our senators, and also our federal delegation, because Providence as a whole, right, makes up the majority of our population, across the states, and Providence here around our neighborhoods where we work at, for example, there's a lot of Latinx folks from Guatemala, folks from the DR, folks from Mexico, folks from El Salvador, Honduras, that don't know what the hell we're talking about tonight, that aren't part of these conversations, right? And this is not an offense to anyone, and please don't. I'm just saying from our perspective, from what we see around Manson, Oneyville, Putnam, Atwells, Chalkstone, Southside, et cetera. And we have to bring them to these conversations. So those are just my 2 cents in this whole conversation. I do have my concerns as well. I think there is more to the pushback. Instead of requesting 35%, why are we requesting 50%, right, for investments? So the TCI program also, at the moment, I don't think it's equitable for advisory bodies that lack robust representation, that have truly affected the communities, and also lack the decision of making power and meaningful shape to allocation of TCI funds for requests about memberships and processes. At the end of the day, we have to, right, make sure that what we're demanding is also equitable with our communities and our processes. I wanted to just ask here my friend here, Rosario, otra pregunta, otro comentario que tengo.
Que te decía yo la otra vez que
I want to translate if it's cool quickly, because she doesn't speak English.
Go ahead, Enrique.
Okay, thank you so much.
Que es importante buscar y hacer llegar a la población talleres donde aprendan precisamente todo el tipo de situaciones que conllevan a que el problema del transporte tenga siempre muchos problemas de contaminación.
So she mentioned, that we need to create, right, like, and I'm sure there's been already a push to create programs or outreach groups so that our communities can be aware of the pros and cons of the TCI program. That's what she said. ¿Algo otra cosa más?
Uno de ellos, y grandemente, es la polución ambiental, también es del sonido. Y últimamente tenemos tanto las motos como los carros que ponen su ruido a todo volumen, parece que llevan una discoteca rodante.
Right. Yeah, so she's just basically saying now that the fact that we do have a lot of cars in the streets, motorcycles, ATVs, dirt bikes. Everyone is in their free will, right, to do whatever they ride and drive whatever they want, right? But that also adds on, and that contributes to a lot of the pollution that we carry. So I'm a big fan of the push to create bike paths across the city, right? With ONA is a big supporter of that. But just a little bit of what we had our 2 cents in today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have that has all been awesome. We do have additional comments and questions. And I think, Enrique, you brought up a lot of great points. And I heard you mention labor standards. So I just want to use this opportunity to ask Pat Crowley, if you want to go ahead and chime in from the union labor perspective representing AFL-CIO.
Sure, thanks, Priscilla, and thanks everyone else. I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation. A number of things about TCI as it relates to labor standards that I think are important. I mean, one, the transportation sector in the economy is heavily unionized already, but that hasn't precluded the labor movement from taking a leadership role and looking to make the changes that are necessary. If 40% of the emissions are coming from the transportation sector, much of that is coming from trucks, delivery vehicles, and the places where my members work every single day. That said, if you've ever walked through a warehouse where trucks are driving in and out of it, it is a polluted area. And those are people that are getting sick and dying from the fact that they're working in an industry that is polluting the rest of the state and the rest of the country. So we have a strong interest in making sure that there's changes that are brought forward. Our goal is to make sure that those changes are mindful of a just transition so that the people that don't get left behind are the people that are working in those industries, while the bosses and the corporate, bigwigs are profiting on the transition. So we've got to be mindful of that. And I think by working together with places like Green Energy Consumers Alliance and the other folks that are on this call, we can take a big step forward. But it's even more granular than that. And I've mentioned this a couple of times when I've had the chance to talk about it. And my sister Leslie here mentioned it in her opening remarks as well. We need to have more people riding the bus. We need to have a stronger presence on RIPTA for a lot of different reasons. But one of the most important for me is it's hard to hate people that you see every day. And I want to make sure that people in Rhode Island, I don't care if you're wearing a suit and a tie or work boots carrying a lunch pail going to work on RIPTA, those people, all of us need to interact on a daily basis instead of driving our cars, going to our workplace and segregating ourselves by the jobs that we do. You may get off the bus and go in different directions, but while you're on during that commute for that 35 minutes, hour long, however long it is, those are people that you're never going to have a chance to interact with otherwise. And it's impossible, I think, to hate people that you know. So I think that's an important part. Secondly to that, there are places where we have people that have really good union jobs that people can't get to because there's no transportation there. UPS, horrible employer, well-paid work, strong union members that are part of the Teamsters Union. They're trying as hard as they can to get bus stations and bus drop-off and pickup locations at some of their facilities because they have so much work that they can't hire enough people. But they can't hire enough people because people can't get to those good paying jobs. Well, that's just stupid. I mean, it's counterproductive from a labor point of view. It's counterproductive from from an employment point of view. So how do we make sure that we have the resources available to have the transportation system geared towards working people's needs to get to and from work instead of shopping needs primarily, right? I don't care. Listen, it's important to be able to take the bus from my home to the shopping center down the street. Very important. But it's also important for me to be able to take the bus from my home to my workplace. And we don't have a system that's designed around those particular needs. And one of the reasons why we don't have a system around those particular needs is because the way RIPTA has been underfunded over the generations of, the last 20, 30, 50, pick the decades, right? We need to make sure that this system isn't poor people transportation. And that's how it's viewed across too many sectors of the state. It's poor people transportation, which means it's brown and black people transportation. Yeah. So therefore, the state has not paid enough attention to it. And if by not paying enough attention to it, they haven't made demand as part of that process. So we need to make sure that that is part of this conversation. And thirdly, while we're talking about the ways we can attract business into the state, listen, I don't care about market-based solutions. It takes a communist to understand how horrible capitalism is. But let's make it work. And if we want to attract good businesses into the state, one of the things that we can do to say, you know what, one more thing, and your employees are going to be able to take the bus to work for free. And on the weekends or on their days off, they can take the bus from wherever they're living down to South County to go to the beaches. Or if they want to go see a show in Woonsocket, or if they want to go out to dinner in Providence. And if that's one more thing that we can say to a company that's going to come in and provide good jobs to the people of Rhode Island, so be it. Now, I'll give you one example close to my home, and then I'll turn things over. So I live in Lincoln, and I live in between Old Lewis Quisset Pike and Smithfield Avenue. It might as well be two different states. Smithfield Avenue is a urbanizing sector of the state, and Old Lewis Quisset Pike, which is the road that runs by Twin River Casino, is suburban. There's more buses on Old Lewis Quisset Pike than there are on Smithfield Avenue. That's just stupid. I understand why they're doing it. They want to get people to Twin River. CCRI is there. It serves an important need. But all of the people that are living on Smithfield Avenue that are renting houses and living in triple deckers have just as much, if not more of a need to be able to take, free public transportation to work, to home, to church, wherever it may be. And that's just about setting priorities. And I think we need to have a conversation every time we talk about transportation in this state and talk about TCI. How do we use the revenue that we're going to generate to induce demand, to increase ridership, but also to get the state to focus on making sure that the ridership of RIPTA, the transportation system in the state, is centered on justice, not centered on the needs of consumers or the needs of people that are selling stuff to consumers.
So these are, Pat, these were excellent points. These are all excellent points for you all to debate and talk about with Terry and other Rhode Island leaders about at the equity advisory boards, about how TCI is really going to be invested, how those revenues, who's going to be served, right? These are excellent points, and the labor issues are right on point. And I think if you all if you're able to join the webinar on Thursday, you're going to hear a lot of statements about the values of TCI as they align with labor and how we get people into the workforce, just transition and all. So we have two questions, one from Camille and one from Marcella. Marcella, I think you were first and then Camille. Marcella? Bentacourt?
Trying to find Marcella, but I can't find her in the Zoom.
Camille?
It might be maybe Camilo had an additional point or question. Feel free to unmute yourself, Camilo. I also wanted to point out that Bernice, Liza Birkin asked a good question in terms of the points that Enrique made earlier, and wondering, will the equity advisory board members be paid? And this might be a question for Terry, since it's a state-related question.
Terry, I'm giving you all the hard questions.
That's okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you, Enrique and Liza, for bringing that up. Recently, we had an engagement with REJC on the DEM, partnered with the City of Providence and the REJC, and we included EPA as well to talk about green justice zones. And we met for over a year. And to my knowledge, that's the first time that we have paid participants for their expertise to help us come up with the right outcomes and really come up with a community-centered set of recommendations that brought the expertise of the folks in the community to the table. I thought that was an excellent model. We're going to continue it. It works. It gets people engaged, and you know what? It's fair, right? So you're compensating people for their expertise, and nobody likes to work for free. And when you bring your knowledge to the table and your expertise to the table, people should be compensated for that. So I don't have a definitive answer in terms of whether the equity advisory panel members will be compensated, but I hope they are. And I would like to push for that, but we don't have that specifics yet. That might be something that comes out of our Rhode Island legislation. I believe it's in there now, the compensation piece.
Camilo, did you have a question? Thank you for that answer, Terry.
I think I was just hitting exclamation points. I'll leave it to everyone. What everyone's saying.
Any other questions that we haven't answered? So again, this is just the very first conversation that y'all are having, right? So we don't have to exhaust our questions tonight, but I hope that you keep this energy up. You come around that table, you work together to shape what TCI could look like in Rhode Island. You've all made excellent points about the things that you'd like to see. And that's only going to happen if you get around this table and you ensure that it does, and you raise your voices in collective power, right? In partnership. I mean, I think, and I hope that you've heard from Terry that he's trying to work to implement these things right alongside you, right? And in some places, you don't have that degree of unity and comity between the state agencies and communities, but you have it here in Rhode Island. And now let's see what you can build from that. Let's see what you can do with that.
And I think I see your hand raised.
Yeah, it's just a quick question in regards to like funding for the TCI program. I was looking, you know, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. I've been, you know, doing my research on like the funding that goes into TCI, and in regards to like the core, right, the core funder for this, the Rockefeller's brother fund. I wanted to get like a clarification, like the correlation between, you know, their funding being invested in this project. Like, what are the pros and cons to that? I don't know if someone has the answer to that. I'm just curious to know, like, what's the correlation in regards to like the Rockefeller's Brothers Fund investing in this TCI program.
I have no information about that, Enrique. The philanthropy that I know that's heavily invested is the Energy Foundation, the Barr Foundation in Massachusetts. Those are the two funders that I'm the most aware of, and the Energy Foundation is the funder that's supporting the work that we're doing to drive and center equity and justice in this process. But I'm not aware of the role of the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that I'm not aware of it.
And in the last few minutes that we have, Bernice wanted to point out a couple other questions and comments that came in. Andrew asks, does TCI include funding for affordable housing near transit stops? And I'll pose that question for who wants to chime in. And then I'll also point out there's been a lot of conversation in the chat as folks have been following, talking about RIPTA, increasing frequency of buses. And there was also a comment about the phasing of car tax. So I am just throwing that out there in case folks just have thoughts about any of the above. But there is that question related to the intersecting issues of affordable housing.
So as far as I know, and as far as the conversations that I've been engaged in, we are talking strictly about investments into and through the transportation system. But the conversation about transit-oriented development and the need for affordable housing, as well as affordable transportation systems, are linked conversations. Affordable housing is not necessarily a part of the TCI conversation, but that doesn't mean it can't come right up alongside this conversation in terms of the people who are advocating for affordable housing. Those two conversations are definitely linked, right? There's no question about that. But that is not the function or focus of TCI. It's to bring down carbon emissions from the transportation sector. But is there a link between the need for developing affordable housing and transit-oriented development and the expansion of transportation systems? Absolutely. There's a straight line that runs through that. Terry, you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Bernice, I'll just add that there are no formal restrictions on the use of TCI funds. So, but like Bernice said, the investment plan has to be aligned with reducing greenhouse gases from the transportation sector in order for the program to work properly. And things like smart growth strategies, transit related development, anything that reduces people's need to drive over the road using a fossil fuel vehicle is on the table. And as long as it demonstrates success for the goals that we have for the program, then we could invest in that.
Enrique, is your hand up again, or is it still up? Or is it up again? Either or.
Sorry about that. It's not up again. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Well, I have a question for you all. Do you want to keep this conversation going?
Yes.
Well, Terry, you have to nod your head, Terry.
Oh,
I do.
Other than
I
Terry.
definitely want to keep this conversation going.
So it's up to you, right? You have your partner, Terry, your partners from the Priscilla and Mal, right? You have all of you together tonight. Plus, there's a lot of people who couldn't be here who should be in this conversation, right? The state chapter of the NAACP, they should be in this conversation. Some youth groups should be in this conversation, right? So there's the circle can get bigger and the conversation can get deeper. But I so appreciate you all coming out tonight. So very much appreciate you spending this time with us to have this conversation.
Thank you, Vernice. And if I could just jump in and maybe start to elaborate on what some next steps might look like. So as Vernice said, again and again, like we're really at the beginning of this. I think because legislation was introduced, there's this perception that, everything's been decided, but things aren't decided until the bill is passed. And then even after that, it's every year what those investment decisions are going to look like, right? And so when folks are asking, like, can TCI be, used to make RIPTA free? Can it be used to make the bus better? Can it be used to, improve walking and cycling infrastructure? Can potentially do all of that, but I also want to say, like, it's not the only thing, right? Like, TCI is one tool that we need in the toolbox to be able to begin to address some of these inequities and make the investments that we need to make to improve mobility and decrease our contribution to climate change. But, it's lots of moving pieces all together. And I'm really excited, to participate with lots of folks that aren't just thinking about transportation, but thinking about how those other pieces can all kind of come together and align. And so if you are interested in kind of continuing to stay in the loop, I will drop my email in the chat here. And feel free to reach out because advocates are having these conversations, and this is not the last time that this group of people will come together to talk about these things. We'll hopefully meet in person very soon. I'm sad that we weren't able to do it tonight, but I'm really glad that Bernice and Cheryl and all the folks who made it tonight. Terry, thank you for coming on this online format. So it is 8 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's times. And so please continue to engage on this. We will make it easy to find continued opportunities to engage on this, because it's not just one conversation, it's not just one event. This needs to be a central part of how transportation decisions are made in Rhode Island. So with that, I think that's all I have to say, but I'm not in a rush to go anywhere. So if there's still anything that anyone has not shared, if you want to put it into the chat, if you want to unmute yourself and just say something, the floor is yours.
Well, Mal, can I just give a shout out to you and Priscilla and Green Energy Consumers for all of the effort and energy to bring us together tonight and all the organizing that went on. Just want to give you all much respect.
Thank you. Yeah, and big shout out to Liza, who was able to get an invite out to this event to lots of people while she was on vacation. So huge shout out to her and lots of the other folks that have been organizing around the Kennedy Plaza issue as well. It's really easy to mobilize when there's a dedicated group of folks already doing this work.
Thank you so much to everyone. We appreciate the invite and look forward to being part of these future conversations. Thank you. Thank you, Mal. Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Enrique.
Thank you, Enrique.
Thank you.
And also, I'm not sure if Terry has left at this point, but thank you to Terry for joining us today. You know, on this on this evening. Terry has been a big part of Rhode Island's participation in TCI and has represented Rhode Island, you know, over the last couple of years. So it's great to have him being a strong leader and to really be willing to have these conversations and listen and also contribute.
Thanks,
yeah,
Mel.
absolutely second that. Thank you, Terry. And also shout out to the George Wiley Center Latino Policy Institute. We've been convening for months and months, just really talking about transportation and equity and also about the intersecting issues. So really fortunate to have them as partners and peers in this work.
Thank you so much to everyone tonight. This was incredible. And I know that for myself, my marching orders for myself are going to be to get this survey out far and wide so we can really hear from the people of Rhode Island and what kinds of investments they want. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Liza. And great. We still have Pat on the line. I think we lost Marcella, but we'll make sure to circle back with her. I'm glad you were all able to interact with Marcella. But Marcella's at the Latino Policy Institute, as you all heard. And then Camilo Crowley and I work closely as co-chairs of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. So thank you, Pat, for being here tonight. And we're excited. Hopefully we can, in the near future, think about meeting in person outdoors. So that's a very exciting thought.
Cool. On that note, any final thoughts before I close the meeting out and stand in front of a fan all night?
Mal, did you see that somebody asked, is there a main place to look for updates about this conversation and this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you email me, I can kind of add you to the broader email list full of advocates that are working to help pass TCI, but also help enact stronger equity provisions. So there was a conversation earlier about, you know, can Rhode Island do better than 35%? And the answer is yes, with good advocacy. That's happening right now. So if you're interested in that, please email me. But if you want to get general updates on what TCI is going on, then the Climate Crisis Campaign Twitter will be a good place to look for that information. Things will always be posted there, as well as any of the social media accounts of the organizations that participated today. So George Wiley Center will help us promote stuff. And have information. Green Energy Consumers posts information on TCI. Acadia Center, Hank Webster is a representative of, and they post a lot of great information on TCI. And so those are all good places to find things.
Is it time for cocktails now, Matt?
I think it is. Yeah. I hope so. All right. Well, thank you everyone again so much for joining. And thanks, Leslie, for sharing that survey once again. And I hope to see you all very, very soon in person.
Thanks.
Have a good rest of your night.
Good night, great people.
Good night.